convene the meeting at this point, call it to order. The August 5th meeting of the Climate Action Committee. This meeting will be video recorded and broadcast over Local Access Channel 8 through the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov. And we have instructions on the list, but we can probably dispense with that for now. I don't see any visitors online. So at that point, why don't we just move on to the main topic of the meeting? Wait, we do have Eleni coming in. Okay, I guess she is joining at this point. So the main topic today, and the sole topic today, is to give us a little bit more time to dive into the climate survey. And this is to allow us to explore in a little bit more depth the findings and the insights from I'll say the initial findings, John and Jack, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
From the survey.
That's right.
John and Jack sent out a wonderful document, and I think I'm in awe of the amazing work that you both did. Your agility with wrangling with data is awesome, and statistics is amazing. So we owe you both a huge thanks on that for kind of piloting us through this, not only the design and rollout, but the huge amount of work that clearly you're doing on the analysis side. Now, when I say go into a little bit more depth, I guess John and Jack will kind of guide us through, but my preference would be not to have all of us dive into the nitty-gritty of all the cross-tab statistics. I'm sure that John and Jack would be happy to go into that in separate discussions. But today, I think probably what we want to focus on is more, what is it telling us? What are we seeing in the first set of analyses? What are you not seeing in that initial set of analyses? And, kind of sanity check the data that we are seeing. So with that, I'll turn it over to John. And I will ask, let's allow John to get through his presentation. So we kind of get a full feel for the, what we're going to see before we dive in with questions.
Okay. So you can hear me, right? But you cannot see me? Okay.
Correct.
Mike's shaking his head. Was that?
We can hear you.
He was nodding his head. Okay. All right. Good. I don't know what's going on with the camera, but you're better off this way, so don't worry about it. Let me see if I can share my screen, though, because I would like to be able to do that. Let's see how that works. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think this is going to work out. Okay. Share. And then I can do this. So you should be seeing a really boring text document at this point.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Well, you see a text document. I think it's exciting, but go ahead.
But it's boring. So yeah, a few words before we dive in. Yeah, Jack and I have been, pretty hard at work, I think, to complete a preliminary set of analyses, and there's quite a bit here. To continue calling it preliminary is probably not entirely accurate. So I think that's there's a lot to chew on, and one of the questions we want to kind of pose back to the group is, what in particular are you interested in hearing about during today's discussion? So we'll turn back to that in just a second. But just to kind of recap where we're at and what we're doing, we've got this nice survey that was done, asked a lot of interesting questions, generated quite a few respondents, and a fair amount of information. And we now are charged with taking that information and telling a story. What is the story that this material can tell us as a committee, and the town as well, and the citizens, the residents of the town? And that story really needs to answer a handful of questions. What are people currently doing or not doing themselves as individuals to address climate change? Are they putting solar panels on their roof, for example, to take one prominent example? What are their priorities for the collective action that the town can take? So town-wide proposals that might be implemented, and approaches that might be taken. What are people's preferences regarding the information that they receive from the town and the kind of support and assistance that they get? And then cutting across all three of those questions is the overall question of how the individual characteristics of people, demographic features, their age, for example, as well as their attitudes and beliefs, how do those factors relate to the actions that people take, what their priorities are and what their preferences are? Are there relationships between any of those possible factors and the way that people make their decisions and take action? And then finally, to wrap up the story, we want to tease out the actionable implications of the answers to all those foregoing questions. And I think that's critical today and going forward, for all of us to really maintain focus on what can we do with this information, this material, because frankly, there are a lot of tables, a lot of charts, there are a lot of possible relationships that one could look at, and many of them are just not interesting enough to warrant investing a lot of time. And that's, I think, kind of our great challenge here, is to take this bolus of material and home in on the core story that we can tell with this. And we've started to do that. You'll see as we walk through this. Hopefully you've seen already, if you've had a chance to look at the material, that we have begun teasing out some initial impressions and findings. We obviously need to do more of that, and we're interested to hear your take on those things, and what those key actionable insights can be. The basic features of the material that you got in front of you, I think, hopefully is self-explanatory by now to a large extent, but you've got both the charts and tables that we have pulled together to present the data, and you've got the prose. You've got some narrative around that, both describing how we got those charts and tables and what we think they mean. And just a very quick reassurance up front, the tables and charts are certainly not final in a variety of ways, but first and foremost, in terms of format, they're not final. They're not consistent across the document, for one thing, and we will make sure that they are consistent in look and feel. And we'll also make sure that they conform to any sort of requirements that are needed for special audiences, people who are visually impaired, colorblind, what have you. So just be assured that we'll take care of those kinds of details as we progress. So the kinds of questions that we have for you as we go through this is, first and foremost, is what we're presenting clear? Does it make sense? Are we, is anything just wrong outright? We obviously would like to know that. Are we looking at the kinds of questions and relationships that you want examined, that you think are important to examine? And on that note, I think that if there's something that you're not seeing in here, any sort of question that we're not posing or relationship that we're not looking at that you think is important to, you could mention that during the discussion today, but we don't want to spend more than a couple of minutes kind of getting into it today. It would be much more effective if you could kind of package that up in an email, send that over to me and Jack as well, outside of the meeting, and then we can kind of suss it out and perhaps integrate it with the rest of the analysis that we're doing. Because one could do these analyses forever, and we do need to put a cap on this, and that in fact will be something we'll be deciding finally over the coming days after this meeting is done, exactly when we sort of want to put down our Excel pencils, if you will, and pick up and really continue to utilize our prose pencils and get the report done, because it's important to just get it done, and there's a lot to work with, I think, already. So I'll pause right there actually, and just to sort of kind of reiterate what Tom said, that we sent out a couple of dozen pages of material, and we're not going to go through each one of the tables or charts. You wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want that. But we will walk through expeditiously the material that you have in front of you. Before we launch into that, I just want to kind of quickly throw it open and see if what you would like us to, or hoping we could go over today, if I haven't already mentioned it. Is there anything in addition to that that you were hoping we would go through on this call and that you think is important to talk through?
Yeah, I have a question
Mm-hmm.
or comment.
I'm listening.
Okay, I was waiting for the chair to acknowledge me, and
Oh,
I'm sorry. That's a good point. Actually, sometimes for Zoom, that's probably a good idea. Thanks for the reminder. So yeah, if you're comfortable with raising hands or raising the Zoom virtual hand, yeah, go for it. So Mike.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I
Um,
like it.
so John and Jack, first of all, excellent work. You guys, it shows that you guys have put a bit of effort into this, and lots of hours, I'm sure. What I think is missing from the introduction is the relevance of the sample size. How are folks to interpret this or not interpret it? And I'll give you an example. If you look at the demographics of the town, only 26% of the town's population is 65 and over. Yet that's the majority of our respondents in the survey. So, how do we interpret that, or how do people reading the survey results interpret that? Because it sounds like we don't have a good sample size of our younger population, unfortunately, the families. So I was surprised, because I would have thought that the population, 5,000 plus whatever, in Eastham, it would have been more than 25 or 26% over the age of 65, but that's not what the latest 2023 census
Yeah,
shows.
I'm surprised too. Okay.
Yeah, I can respond to that in part. Don't forget that we didn't try to survey kids at all.
Oh,
really.
no.
So it's really what percentage of the adult population does our census represent? And I think it's not as bad as you seem to imply. But even whatever it is, I think we'll certainly be upfront about that kind of description, and imply, it's not a scientific sample. It's a sample of convenience, and that any interpretation has to be done cautiously.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we need some sort of a disclaimer,
Oh,
but
sure.
but Jack, even if 26% is above 65, and you assume that, let's assume for worst case scenarios, all 26% of them are couples. All right, so that means population wise, only 13% are in that category in terms of families, roughly. That's right.
Your point's well taken,
Okay.
and we'll look into that, and we'll address it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a fair point, and I mean, I regard it as a standard part of any document of this kind that's based on original data that you've collected. A standard part of that is to characterize your sample relative to what you know about the population, and whether you call it disclaimer or caveats or whatever. But you provide that information, and as needed, you provide some interpretation of the significance of that for the audience, but then otherwise let them reach their own judgments about that. So, but yeah, good point. We'll definitely take care of that. So anyone else, was there anything else that someone else wanted to say that they were hoping to cover during the discussion today that we haven't already touched on?
Hi, John. This is Ula. I just want to let you know that I did join eventually. I had a tough time with the link. I couldn't get in on my computer, so I had to switch to my iPad, which seemed to be working fine.
Okay. Welcome.
I sent an email, so ignore that.
Okay.
And
Very
Tom,
good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olaf, and also mention, welcome to Alani. and
Eleni. Eleni.
Eleni, sorry, Eleni.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Hey, Lenny.
And Jim Daw, who both
Sorry,
joined
yeah.
us as well.
I went over to town hall. I thought I'd get sworn in before the meeting. I just didn't have the right meeting. So
Oh no.
here now.
Well, welcome, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay. And John, also a note that the screen that you're sharing is our video, so we're not there.
Yeah, I was hoping to see faces as well as document, but I'm going to give up on that. So we'll just go with the document. So, okay. All right. So I'm getting the feeling that we can proceed here. And just know that I can't see if you raise your hand or your jaw is dropping and you need to jump in on something. You'll have to let Tom.
I'll keep an eye on that for you, John.
All right. Very good. Okay. So the other thing that I kind of didn't point out about the documents you have in front of you is maybe self-evident that this is really our working document at this point. It's going to be what we eventually develop into the report. It's not sort of fully structured that way, but it's loosely structured that way, starting with the fact that it begins with the demographics, the characteristics of the sample. Mike was touching on this a moment ago. And how to make sure we contextualize this appropriately. The first set of materials that's in the document you have contains information on the sample, including their preferred format for resources and their feelings about the need for or about the different aspects of climate change, the sort of attitudinal measures that came towards the end of the survey. We did include in here, we kind of got ahead of ourselves just a little bit. We showed how information sources may or may not vary by two factors, residency as well as age. We just wanted to let people get an initial look at those potential relationships. That's something we will probably circle back to towards the end of the document. I think when we finish packaging up the report, what we're going to want to do is move from kind of the presentation of the overall facts of what our sample is and what we've learned about their actions and their priorities to what we can do about it. And in the what we can do about it section, I think it'll be helpful to look at things like what information sources do people prefer, and does that vary depending on their age or their residency or what have you. So for now, we're not planning to spend a lot of time going into that, but just know that that's how we're going to use that information. There do seem to be some potentially interesting relationships there to explore. And this is a good example, I think, of what could be actionable information for the committee. But otherwise, this is, for the time being, this is the straightforward presentation, we think, of what the summary. It's a profile of our respondents. Here's what they look like, and again, we will put that in proper context. From there, we sort of boil down, if you will, to a set of factors that we're going to use for comparative analyses, and we do comparative analyses throughout the rest of the document and throughout the rest of the report. And in some cases, these are synonymous with the characteristics that I just presented. In other cases, they are sort of adaptations of that. So the age range, for example, rather than break that out into 5 or more levels, we've got it down to 3 levels. It makes doing analysis more tractable when you're trying to compare across subgroups. But we have, in a couple of cases, kind of explored how the picture might look differently if we cut the age range in this case differently. So you'll see that as we go. We don't stick, strictly speaking, to these 5, but these are the core for us. And again, hopefully these are pretty self-explanatory what they are: age range, the type of household, namely, are there children in the household or not, residency status, financial status is a self-reported summary characterization of how people feel what their financial status is as a household. and then employment status. This is one where we merged a couple of different variables to form a new way of talking about people's employment. Is someone an employee? Are they an owner? Or are they in fact retired? So these are the 5 core things that we looked at. And then we're going to use those, and we do use those, to generate a bunch of tables for both the individual responses to climate change and the questions about those individual responses, as well as the collective responses to climate change, where we've got a couple of different questions that focus on that. I'm going to turn the floor over here to Jack in just a second to talk through the individual responses, since he was really focusing on that. But let me just take a breath, see if there's any questions of clarity or completeness here, or observations that people have about what I've talked through to this point. Okay, I'm going to
questions for John. I don't see any hands. John, I will ask under household type. I see 3 colors in the pie chart, but only 2 in the legend.
Oh, yes. So let's see if we can fix that on the fly here. There. Thank you.
Magic of Zoom.
Good catch. Thank you. And I will close that. Jack, would you like to take over, and I can scroll down as needed, but I'd like you to, if you wouldn't mind, talk through this section for folks.
Yeah, let me start off with a couple of preliminary, I guess, questions, comments, observations. There are, sort of technical questions about, you'll notice in a number of the charts, there's a not yet, or which is a shorthand for I plan to do it in the next 2 years. And one question that we have is whether we should combine that group with the yes group, or just keep it as it is, or drop them all together from the tables, just to simplify the opposite, what one looks at. And another question is what is a meaningful difference? I don't think we're going to do statistical tests per se, but a 10% difference in the response rate of 5%, does it need to be more than that? Something else to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing, and maybe the most important, I guess, from my perspective, is we've identified, John and I, with a little bit of feedback in an earlier meeting, these sets of characteristics for comparison. And in some cases, it's really quite cumbersome to go across and look at sort of a 3-way comparison. And I'm wondering if it makes sense really to just focus on specific groups or subgroups, or particularly groups that we think that the select board might be interested in, or the Center on Aging. So for example, instead of doing, household type, comparing those 3 categories, should we really just focus on families with kids, or on seniors living alone, and leave out everybody else in those discussions, or just on workers as compared to retirees, or the financially vulnerable population. And then as an extension of that, for some of these categories, they're large enough that we can break them down. So for example, full-time residents, retirees, older people, we can look at break that down by financial status, for example, to really sharpen the focus a little bit. So with that by way of introduction, let's just start looking at the tables. Well, there's a little summary of results that I did to highlight some things. And one last thing I should say, that these results really are preliminary. John and I work separately, and we were working with different data sets. And the first thing we need to do tomorrow is go back and double check our data and make sure everything is consistent. And there are some results in here that seem a little counterintuitive, and it's certainly possible that they're wrong. So before we start getting too much into the weeds on specific results, let me just say that we're going to go back and double check everything and make sure that what we finally report is in fact accurate. So on the Mass Save audit, for example, there were very few differences at all, and the only one that seemed relevant was the part-timers versus full-timers. And that sort of makes sense in a way that people are not here full time are probably less concerned about how energy efficient their home is. But that could also be a target for education.
Mhm.
There was a follow-up question about did you follow up on the recommendation for the Mass Save audit? And almost everybody said yes. So there's no really detail or variation there to report. Solar panels, there are a number of, let's go down to the tables. I think it's the easiest way to do this. So this is on page 8. So here, now I've highlighted in yellow differences that I thought were significant. But on this very first table, for example, household type, you can see where the not yet could make a meaningful difference in whether you say family type is meaningful or not. So, we'll come back to that, I guess, after we go through this a little bit. And then here again, the reasons for no solar panels. I think the three that are most relevant really are the lack of information, don't know enough, because that's something as a committee that we can try to address if we can pinpoint or highlight where that's a very significant response or a particular subgroup where that's an important response. And then the financial factors, too expensive or poor financial return. Because again, there are opportunities for going into detail. Well, how much do these things really cost? We believe that people really don't have information about either what the costs are or how to finance them. So those responses, I think, are ones we really want to focus on. And then the others are things that we kind of, if they're not things that we can take action on per se. So for example, trees and orientation, that's a pretty frequent response, but that group might very well be a target for community solar for education. So that's how I think we want to highlight these results in terms of both the frequency of the responses, whether they're mentioned a high percentage of the time or low percentage of the time, and also if there are particular subgroups that look like we might want to target or try to target that group.
I'm sorry, Jack, we have a question from Mike. Is that something you can field now?
Sure.
Yeah, I think what was really telling to me was that over 40% of the folks that say they're well off financially think that there's poor financial return on solar panels. So those are the folks you would think that would be willing to take more of a risk financially, yet they're way out of line with respect to understanding what they really cost and how much savings they get over time. So yeah, huge education opportunity there.
Right, partially, but on the other hand, that's the one where if you break that down by age, I think it turns out that it's the older who say poor financial status, which I think is a function of their expectation of how much longer they expect to be in their particular home. So I think that's a nuance we can try to develop. But in general, I mean, your point's certainly well taken. I think
maybe I'm not sure how we do this, but why is it that they're only thinking about themselves versus their families or
well, also resale value of a home.
Right.
Yeah. So
in resilience to climate change. So in price increases. So,
yeah.
Right. It's a good education opportunity.
Yeah, no
doubt. Okay, so let's scroll down a little bit more. So age, here we had a 2-category breakdown and then a 3-category breakdown. And in terms of the frequency of having solar panels, there wasn't much difference. But when we looked at the reasons for no solar panels, this is on page 9, we could see there was quite a big difference between the younger old and the older old. And I think,
here we go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, if you look at the table above, the difference between less than 65 and older was 37 to 28. But when you go to the table below, the 65 to 74 group is much more like the less than 65, and it's the 75 and older group that I'm sorry, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this, again, this could be either an anomaly or something we need to go back and double check. But it does seem like there is a significant difference between the two age groups. Employment status, retirees versus workers. Do we want to distinguish owners from employees, or just do retirees versus workers? And that, again, I think the workers, while poor financial return was one where there seemed to be a difference between employees and owners. It could be owners are feeling more financially strapped, owners of businesses. So that's a possibility. Residents, not a big difference in the reporting of solar panels, but the full-time people were more likely to say that it was a matter of expense and poor financial return than part-time people. And
Jack,
also much more likely to talk about trees and orientation.
Jack, can you clarify what the difference is between employees and owners?
We asked if they own a business explicitly. And if they said no and they work, then they're an employee.
So a resident business or a business? Or don't we distinguish?
We didn't distinguish between where the business is located.
Okay, but we know how many owners there were that took the survey and how many employees.
Right.
Okay, can you tell me what the ratio is? Do you remember?
I think it's slightly more employees than owners.
I didn't remember seeing that. Is that in one of the charts?
It might be up at the beginning.
Okay.
Don't think.
I don't remember seeing a chart that said this is the demographics of owners and employees by age, maybe even.
Well, there were 69 business owners. And I think the total employees, total workers was about 140, maybe something like that.
250.
250.
Okay.
Who are not retired, right?
Right, but there's
250.
no
I'm not
correlation.
sorry. 140, 138. That.
So I guess I'm trying to understand the relevance. The 138 don't necessarily work for this. Don't necessarily work for the 69.
Oh, no, not at all.
Right. So,
They're just,
but the 69 are all in Eastham, and the 138 may not even work in Eastham, right?
the 69 could be part-timers. They could be owners somewhere else.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, that again, that's a question. Do we want to distinguish employees from owners? We thought owners might be interesting because of the business council, the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. I guess if we knew they were owners in their own residence or in town, that's I think more relevant than just owners in general. But we don't know that. So.
Yeah, well, we can look at how many owners are full-time residents, and presumably that would be the target group, and that might be too few. So that's a good point.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Jack, I had a quick question for you on the breakdown of no solar for over 75. Was that on the prior page? It didn't look like it added up to 100%. So I'm not sure how to interpret that.
Is this one?
The reason for no solar at the bottom, what you're showing?
That's because the people could give multiple reasons, and,
okay.
and it's only for people who said no. Right.
So of the people, so presumably people weren't answering that part of it, right? If they said yes, or they weren't even given the opportunity. But the ones that did,
You give up the 3 reasons.
yeah. Right. Wouldn't the breakdown though? I mean, am I interpreting that right for the 75 and older group? I could see it would add up to more than 100%, but let's see. Oh, I guess you got.
No, it doesn't add up at all. It's just saying that 19% of those people said it was too expensive. 11% said they don't know enough, but not necessarily the same people and not necessarily the same three reasons.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you can see the number down at the bottom is relatively small. It's
Oh, I
only
see. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Let me continue a little bit. I don't want to take too much time up with this actually. So heat pumps, um, older people are more likely, said they're more likely to have a heat pump. And then when we look at reasons, not much in the way of differences. Economic status. Here again, I don't know if this is an anomaly, if it really means something, but those people who say they spend carefully were much more likely to say they have a heat pump, and it could be, I'm not sure why. They were less likely to say that it was too expensive or poor financial returns, so it sort of fits what they're having more. Employment status, the retired are more likely than workers. It's not too surprising there. Residents, full-time residents more likely than part-time residents, which makes sense because they're here full-time. Household type, it seemed to be a big difference between families with kids and elderly living alone. Now, so
Jack,
yeah,
sorry, just to interrupt again. Do we know of those that listed that they were comfortable, how many are part-time versus full-time?
yes,
Okay. I'm
yeah.
just wondering if there's a correlation uh, between the heat pump usage of full-time versus part-time for in economic category.
Yeah, well, actually, at the top of page 14 does that breakdown.
Oh, okay.
It's full-time and not it's full-time by financial status. And you can see that whether both for full-time, well, for full-timers, those who are not financially comfortable are less likely by a lot to have a heat pump. But among part-timers, the difference is much smaller by financial status. So, whether that reflects, well, again, I don't want to get involved in kind of speculating,
Yeah. Okay.
so,
Thank you.
and let's see what else we can say about that. Covering heating, okay. So on EVs and on batteries, the incidence of those things was really quite small for both of them. So here we just focus more on the reasons for not having an EV or not having a backup battery system. And let's see. I'm waiting for improved technology, too expensive, waiting to replace current car. Those seem to be the main reasons. I'm not, sure what we can draw from this other than reporting it. And then on the backup battery, I think I ran out of steam here pretty much. If you, having a backup generator seemed to be a fairly common reason for not having a backup battery.
Again, I think it's education.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, don't know enough was the reason cited most often.
Yep.
So,
Mhm.
right. And so I'll stop there. And I guess let me go back to the questions I asked earlier about, what to do with the people who say they're planning to get it in a couple of years. And ask about thoughts on, rather than showing these three-way, four-way breakdowns, just trying to focus on specific subgroups and what you think those subgroups ought to be.
Any thoughts on the not yet group?
Yeah, I mean, I think the not yet group is still relevant because, it's easy to say not yet and still not do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you could, I would put them into the no category.
Well, except we didn't ask them about why they're gonna wait. Well, you only asked the no people for the reasons.
Okay.
So that's a little inconsistent, but maybe we could do that.
Well, they don't, I mean, they don't have it, right? So they, um, in the people in no category, I guess you think 100% of them are never going to do it. So,
If we're persuasive, we can change their minds, right?
And I think, Jack, there was a time frame in the question, wasn't there? Was it a
Yeah,
2 year?
within
2 years.
2 years.
So it was somewhat definitive, but I mean, I agree with Mike. It's kind of maybe a coin toss in my mind. Maybe half of them will do it, the other half won't.
Mhm.
So it depends on how you want to interpret that answer.
and there's no way to follow up with them individually either. So to
Yeah.
know,
All right, so for now, we'll leave them in, and then we can revisit this when we come down to a final draft. How's that?
okay.
And what about the specific subgroups? Um,
Can you repeat again, Jack, the subgroups that you're
well,
Mhm.
families with kids,
yeah.
um, older people living alone, um, people who are not financially comfortable. And I guess in my mind, I'm not sure that there's really that much of a distinction necessarily between those people who say they're just getting by and those who say they're getting by, but there's not much left over. So, I think that's a group I would tend to collapse. I think
Yeah,
rather than try
I
to
would
make it
agree with
deep.
that. I'm just trying, you mentioned earlier, are there specific subgroups that we should
Well,
try to target for one reason or another, in terms of environmental justice? But you could also argue that we should be targeting those that are well off that choose not to make change too, if they can afford it. Um,
mhm.
so I think to me, those are the most important groups, is people who can afford to make change that
Mhm.
aren't, and why aren't they? And then, of course, the folks that can't afford it, that want some help, how do we help them? You know,
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So,
Hmm.
in a way, I mean, should we drop the families with kids or retirement status, household type? I mean, I think that the extent to which we can simplify this will make the report much more readable and
Do,
maybe more powerful as well.
do we see any statistical deviations between having kids or not having kids in some of the answers?
Sometimes, yes.
Significant or
Some of
moderate?
them. Let me see if I can find one in particular.
Because I wonder if you pick up the correlation, as Mike was saying, to the, we're well off or we're just getting by. I mean,
Yeah.
Mike, I
What?
bet, I bet part of the not just getting by is going to be people with kids. They got a lot on their hands.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, actually, another thing we can do, if we define the groups by financial status and maybe one other characteristics, then we can say, well, who are those people? And we can describe them in terms of employment status, family status, work status, and kind of just leave that as this is what the group looks like, rather than trying to go into all the individual sub characteristics. I think that makes sense to me.
yeah, I agree.
I think when we come to this next section where I'll be sharing some of the analysis on the collective responses, we can also kind of take up this question again because I think there are some potentially interesting variations that have to do with whether or not you're a family with children or not. So, maybe kind of put a pin in this overall question.
I, I have a question, sorry.
Sure.
Are when we publish our final results, are we basically going to publish just essentially the results of the survey? There'll be no, we're not gonna educate folks that we believe are misguided, correct? At this
Correct.
point, at this time?
Right.
Okay, all right.
Right, but I think in the conclusion, we can identify a group that we want to focus on for further education.
can we at least tell them in the findings that we believe there's education opportunities in these categories and look for follow-on material or something like that?
That's kind of up to all of us on the committee, I think.
So
But
that's what I'm asking.
yeah,
I will point out that we do have a topic, Mike, on at the next full meeting, regularly scheduled meeting, I'll say, to talk about next steps on this. So yeah,
Okay.
good point to keep in mind for that.
Thank you. All right.
okay.
Yeah, let me ask another in terms of the what these categories comprise. I have a question on seniors living alone. Is that distinguished from seniors living with somebody with another senior?
We can make that distinction, whether it's with another senior or with younger people, because we did ask for household composition.
Again, I'm wondering, was there a statistical, statistical finding that you were seeing that made seniors living alone being of interest?
Oh, no, I think it's just a general interest in older people who live alone because of potential vulnerabilities.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah, and thinking about the Council on Aging, again, as a potential consumer of what we do, that might be a group that they're particularly interested in.
Mhm.
That was the thinking. But I think, Mike's suggestion to just focus on a couple of groups and then describe who they are. But I think we'll probably also do some of this other kind of more focused analysis and then kind of see what we come up with. John and I.
And I think I saw
Okay.
Roberta's hand up.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you that the sample is relatively small. So maybe there is a little bit of risk of getting too minute in trying to describe those folks over 65. Do they live alone? Do they live here full-time, part-time? To keep it as collapsed as possible, the term that you're using seems to make a lot of sense for a small survey like this.
Mhm.
That's all I had to say.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There was another interesting category, and I don't know if it's significant or not, but household size, 5 or more in household. And I think you were showing like a total of 27, which is interesting because we only had 2 respondents that were 18 to 34 that I would think might have enough kids that could qualify for that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if there's anything in there in terms of multifamily or other things that indicate potential vulnerabilities, and if there's any statistical significance there.
John, do you want to say something about that or?
Not sure how to quite yet how to respond on that one.
Yeah, that might be something good if you could just, send us an email, I guess, any of you, all of you, about these specific kinds of questions. Please do that. And then we can take a look at it.
So I'm going to take the gavel back if it's all right, Jack, and
Please.
because we're at 5:20 p.m. that is, and some of what we're discussing here is relevant to the analyses that I was primarily responsible for, which were the collective responses to climate change. And as a reminder, we had a handful of questions here. One of the core ones was about these 11 hypothetical proposals that could come up at sort of at a town meeting situation, and which people would be likely to support, and they could select up to 5. And then there was another question that was focused on a theoretical $100 that you would have as the lead planner for the town, and how would you allocate that imaginary $100 across 5 different areas of effort. So those are the 2 big questions that we're analyzing here. We started just by summarizing all the 11 of the proposals in a single chart, and to see what levels of support each of those received. And then we also explored some grouping or clustering possibilities there to see if there were any groups that made sense, because we did have a couple of proposals, you'll recall, that were focused on electric vehicles, for example. There were a couple that were focused on solar, and so we thought it made sense to explore whether or not those groupings seemed to be in the minds of our respondents as they were indicating support for, or in some cases lack of support for any of these sets of proposals. So I've got some summary preliminary observations. We have some summary preliminary observations up front here before diving too heavily into the charts. And in terms of the 11 discrete proposals, it was pretty clear that a couple of them were dominant, where you had more than 60% of our respondents supporting them, putting them on their top 5 list, if you will. One was the town installing solar of some form, solar systems on town-controlled areas. The other was protection and extension of wetlands and green space. You know, 2 very different kinds of approaches, kinds of proposals. Getting more than 60% of respondents supporting them. And then you had another, and I'm actually going to scroll down to the chart because you can see this, you can see it a little more easily. And then you've got another strong proportion of folks, nearly half, saying that it's important for us to adapt, that they would support adapting the infrastructure, investing in adapting the infrastructure of the town to withstand the change and the impacts of climate change. And then the numbers continue on down, and bringing up the rear here, you've got a couple that are focused on EVs and yeah, there we go. Installing free EV chargers, reduce parking fee for EVs. Those are kind of towards the bottom end of things. Now, I mean, I have a couple of takeaways personally looking at these. One is that, you know, the electric vehicles obviously are down towards the bottom, which was a little surprising, but that's how the numbers shake out. And I think beyond that, what I felt was kind of noteworthy is just the variation in things that were proposed and received the most support. You didn't find people, or you appear to find respondents kind of selecting so that they cover all the different aspects of these proposals. So instead of saying, let's really go after solar and invest heavily in that, you've got one of the solar proposals receiving a lot of support. And then it's followed by protecting the wetlands. And then that's followed by adaptation of infrastructure. And then food waste recycling program. So it's almost like people said, well, let's make sure we kind of touch each of the different facets of responding to climate change with the proposals that they supported. And I think you continue to see that to some extent when we did explore grouping them, which we did. We took the initial results and we kind of color-coded each of the proposals for the ones that had something in common, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. You had a couple of solar-focused proposals. You had a couple that are focused on sort of resilience measures, adapting the infrastructure, reducing fire vulnerability, a couple that are focused on EVs. So what we came up with were these 5 groupings by content focus is how we put it. And we looked at the relationship to those 5, to support for those 5. So what we've got in our tables then is an integrated view that shows support for each one of the 11 proposals separately, and then also the level of support for each of the groupings that we derived. And they're shown here in those groups. So hopefully this is reasonably clear to people. You know, here for the variable of age, you've got designated areas for solar and incentivized commercial installation of solar canopies, both solar focused, so they're part of the solar group, and the numbers are for those discrete proposals as well as for the solar group cluster of proposals. And beyond that, the formatting and is as it was with the tables that Jack presented. In yellow, we tried to show things where there seems to be a meaningful difference, whether it's by age, residency, or what have you. And here, just forgive me for scrolling, but I just want to go back up quickly to the summary of findings. There, I think that the crosstab suggests that there's potentially an interesting pattern based on age, that younger respondents seem to favor resilience-focused measures, whereas older respondents are supporting proposals to change behaviors, and provide a couple of specific instances or examples of what I had in mind there. And I thought that was kind of interesting and worth thinking about, and trying to explain if that's a meaningful difference there. Whereas differences between full and part-time residents generally aren't meaningful, and that's what I found across the analyses that I was responsible for on these collective responses. There didn't seem to be a lot of difference between those who are full and part-time residents.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can we pause? I think we have a burning question coming up.
Yep.
So John, Mike, can you please scroll down to the summary again? Keep going all the way. That with the table. Go to the table. So
This table?
I'm trying to understand why why subsidize electric and solar isn't part of the solar group.
Well, because it's subsidized electric. I forget exactly how it was phrased, but it wasn't solely solar. It was subsidizing the installation and integration of electricity and electric powered systems, as well as installation of solar powered systems. So it was both. And I just, you could.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because, when you talk about public infrastructure,
yeah.
I mean, that's also canopies, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got canopies up in the solar, you've got designated areas for solar, which again could be part of the public infrastructure. And then you've got, a separate category where you've got subsidized electric and solar down below. So I'm just concerned we've got some stuff that could be combined that unfortunately isn't.
Well, yeah, if you've got some suggestion for how we could cut these differently, I know you sent a note a little while ago about related to that, but this grouping has been kind of reimagined, if you will. But if anybody is seeing, this is part of the reason we wanted to share this now, is if anybody's seeing a different way to cut these groupings that you think makes a little more sense, then I'd be interested to hear it and see what it is.
So can you repeat again what the question was regarding subsidizing electric solar?
How it was phrased?
Yeah.
I pulled that up, John, if you want me to read it.
Oh, yeah, please. Thank you.
It says, create a town fund to subsidize home electrification and solar panels for lower income homeowners.
Okay, so why isn't that under electric home group then?
It is under electric home group.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading. That goes up, not down. Right.
Right.
I'm thinking that the top is right. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so that's under that.
But as I read that, I'm wondering if that creates more questions than is than the really quick summary that's listed in the table provides insights to, right? Because it's.
But you could argue renewable energy group, maybe electrification, renewable energy.
Yeah,
right?
well, it could, but I'm wondering. I mean, there's a bunch of pieces there in my mind that anyway I could see people objecting to. One would be a town fund, one would be lower income homeowners, one would be home electrification, and another could be solar. I mean, any of those four could create a resistance point. So it's
Yeah.
hard to read, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And expand walkways and trails, that could be part of natural resources too, right?
Natural resources.
Well, you talk about protecting wetlands,
Yeah.
green space. I mean, isn't that where walkways and trails are typically through?
I think it was referring to bicycle trails, not trails through the woods.
Yeah, I don't know if you have that language there handy as
Okay.
well, Tom.
All right.
Yeah, it said expand and improve pedestrian walkways, bike trails, and e-bike charging stations.
All right. So
Yeah.
why isn't that part of public infrastructure then?
Well, its focus is seems to be transportation, providing alternative means for people to move around. That's why it is where it is.
Okay.
So that raises a question in my mind, if I can throw it in. What are we
Yeah.
going to do with the categorization here? And I'm wondering, it's almost like a statistical sampling issue. Are there enough statistically significant mentions of I'll say transportation in these questions to make a judgment on whether people support transportation? Right, because I could read different resistance points in here. One could be,
Right.
yeah, I'd like more EV chargers, but I don't want them to be free. I want them at my house. I don't want them out in the
Right.
public areas. There's a whole bunch of different things in there that could be read into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One question I have is related to that. Is there a bias if you were to correlate the resistance to say reduced parking fees for EVs? Is there a way to correlate that to people who either said yes or soon are thinking about getting an EV? Is there a correlation there, or is there a bias that we can maybe kind of eliminate a little bit?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Possibly, but I think Tom's put his finger on a good point. That begs the question of the analytic value of doing this clustering altogether.
Yeah.
And part of what we're finding as well is just, and you can kind of see it in this table, is that when you do cluster things, you tend to wash out some of what are otherwise meaningful differences across groups.
Right.
They tend to, yeah.
No, I totally see the benefit of having the two of them, but I was just curious as to whether there is a strong correlation between how they relate to these proposals and whether they do have an EV or not, or would never have one,
Yeah.
And are these the only things?
Hold on a sec, Mike.
Yeah.
I think Jack had his hand up. We'll
Yes,
get to you next.
Jack did, correct.
Oh, I was just going to say, in response to Olaf's question, and I don't think I actually shared this with John yet. We did have the open-ended questions, and a number of the comments were really quite snarky, and they tended to come from people who felt that climate change was not very important. So,
right.
And in that group was, the sense that subsidizing EVs is subsidizing rich people, and it's asking taxpayers to subsidize the rich, and so there's some nuances that come out of those open.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
We can exploit when we get into a discussion. But I think the question that John's raising about whether the grouping is helpful at all, or whether it just raises more questions about, well, should this go there, or should that go there, is a relevant one. Does the subgroups, does the grouping help or not?
I think, Mike, you're up next.
Yeah, again, what I'm concerned with too is that we threw out these ideas for them to comment on, right? I know we left some open-ended questions as well, but there's really, while I'm sure a lot of thought went into these specific questions, I'm sure there are other projects that we could have come up with, or that they could come up with,
Sure.
that may have gotten some appreciable support too. So,
sure. Yeah. And part of the point, and part of the reason we're looking at clustering, though, I think, was to try to make sure we were representing different approaches to the challenge of climate change, different strategies for how to attack it, different aspects of it that are relevant. And so what we're trying to do by doing this clustering is step back and see it at that level, rather than getting all the way into the specifics of a very particular set of proposals. We're trying to see patterns, in other words.
But yeah, I totally get it, John.
Yeah.
And you, I mean, it's not like you're just going to show a table that's got the 5 subcategories, right? You're still going to show the
Oh yeah.
subcategories.
Yeah.
So,
For sure.
everybody could pick and choose how they would have regrouped it themselves, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
if they understood the questions.
Mhm.
Because yeah, it's hard for me at this point, by just without having the question in front of me. And for
Right.
example, reduce fire vulnerability. I mean, was that on dwellings? Was that forests? Was that, how was the question worded?
Right. Right. Yeah. It wasn't dwellings, I don't believe, but we shouldn't probably get any further into this. The point is understood here, that the specific wording is important. We can probably do more to make sure we represent more of the wording. At some point, it becomes hard. It becomes difficult to just squeeze it all in. But I think we can do more in terms of presenting this. And then in terms of the broader question about whether or not to even retain these groupings or some set of groupings, I don't know what the sort of final call is on that one. I think it's.
I mean, could one way be to rank these so that you have like the solar group is let's say number one, the highest ranked. I'm just thinking about different types of analysis that could be done to.
That's kind of what we've got here.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I'm thinking, why don't you combine solar and electric and home as renewable energy?
Yeah.
Electrification. As a category.
Yeah. Let's exchange some ideas via email, Mike, and see if we can maybe tighten this up and make it a little more actionable. And I do want to be very mindful. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Roberta.
Yeah. Would it make sense to have a condensed version that is really very public oriented, and we simplify some of these concepts in terms of what the public seems to be focusing on, but also provide a more detailed analysis for people who care and want to go into it deeper? Is that a possibility too? A condensed version and a more elaborate.
Are you talking about this particular analysis, or are you talking about the report generally, Roberta?
Well, the report in general, I mean, it would be a public report, which would obviously going to be a condensed version of much of this information, but that we also provide something available to the public that is more detailed. Many of the things that we're talking about the various age groups and so on, for those who care and are interested. So that if you're still providing that information, it's just for the public, for the general public.
Yeah,
there is a certain message.
I don't see why you wouldn't just have an executive summary up front that does exactly what, Roberta, you're asking, and then you peel the onion underneath. It's what it's what the Cape Cod Commission did when they did their stuff. They did a highlight up front of all the key categories, and then they peeled the onion in the inventory.
Right. But for example, the chart we're looking at right now, that's pretty nitty gritty. You know what I'm saying? And even there's an executive summary, but I'm not even sure that this is relevant to most people who are going to be reading this report. You know what I'm saying? It is a little, it's a lot. It's a lot, especially with the highlighting and so on. So, and I think it's important for that to be public information, but I just don't know where it would dwell. That's all. That's just the point I'm
Some of
making.
it could probably go in an appendix or something like that, and just kind of all
Mhm.
the data and
That's
tables.
Yeah.
yeah, that's the classic strategy for sure.
Yeah.
Is
Hmm.
put it in the appendix. Yeah, between the executive summary and the appendix, you should be able to, um, have sort of the right levels of information accessible to people, but not necessarily in the body of the document.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's we who are highlighting this because it's of interest to us, but maybe in the report ultimately we
Right.
don't have
Right.
Yeah.
red percentages or yellow highlighting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's us just poking around with the data.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, we really want to be careful, not only of John and Jack's time of doing infinite number of, combinations of permutations, but also, remember what W.C. Fields said, there's lies, damn lies, and then statistics. And we don't want to lead people into, jumping to conclusions that may not be there if we overanalyze it too much.
Right.
Again, I really
Yeah.
question whether we can say there's only 19% support for EV and transportation categories just because they answered those three questions that way on the other 65
hmm
category.
hmm
Yeah, I
hmm
mean, I think that if you look at the chart that is above there, where you have the rank of the main categories, and then you had actually the details, that's much more informative for, I think, for the average consumer of this report is to kind of, this is the chart below suggests that natural resources is the most important thing, but there's no I don't think it carries a lot of meaning for the average resident. The one right above it,
You're talking about
that
this one?
yeah, the one right above it where you have it, the kind of the details.
Oh, here, the
Yeah,
support for 11 proposals. This one
these
that's
are all the different proposals, and it shows you which ones
I
were the
see.
highest, got the highest
Right.
and lowest support.
Right. Right. Um,
Yeah,
right.
I
Yeah.
think Olaf, that's a great idea. Again, that shows the data. The data is available, but we're not
Mhm.
overanalyzing it if we stop at that particular chart.
Right.
Right.
We could do that. Okay. All right. Okay, that's helpful. Very helpful discussion. Let me just, because we're at 5:45 here.
And I was remiss to say that I was hoping we could end this by about 6 o'clock again since this is an off-cycle meeting. Is
Yeah,
everybody okay with 6 o'clock?
Yep.
I am. Yes, that would be
Yeah.
great.
It'll be
Okay.
fine.
So the other big question in this area was, again, the hypothetical $100 and 5 different approaches. And we're going to have some of the same questions here, right? And some of the same considerations. These groupings are, but these groupings are what they are. The question is, what are people responding to? As Thomas pointed out, these are fairly complicated headings for each of the 5 types of approaches, and it won't always be super clear what people are really homing in on when they decide to allocate $20 versus $50 or what have you. But that aside, I did find it kind of interesting to see that the transportation focused solutions were getting the sort of the tail end of support in terms of how much money they would get allocated, which was consistent, or I saw as kind of the same as the previous question about the 11 proposals, where you had a couple of EV focused questions that fell to the bottom of the list. I see something there that's sort of a meaningful connection. Then we looked at the comparative analysis factors, full versus part-time, personal finances, etc. And here too, some of the analyses, some of the comparisons seemed kind of interesting to me. So that personal finances appear to have some relationship to people's allocation priorities. We saw some of that in the analyses that Jack did as well. And what you found here is that while everybody, all the different subgroups for personal financial situation, put the most money into increasing open spaces. Those who said I have to be careful about my finances were, what was I trying to say here? The first choice was nearly twice as much as their second choice, right? That's what I was trying to get at here. So in this table, you can see it here, personal financial status. Their average allocation was $35 out of their 100, $35.49 to increasing open spaces. And there's a big gap between that and their second choice, which was the net zero or, net zero construction. Which you didn't see as big a difference for the other two levels of financial situation in that case. And there are a couple of other interesting apparent relationships between the variables that we've been looking at and which of these groupings people picked, or how strongly how much money they allocated to the groups. So there's a bit more analysis to be done on this one, I think, but some potentially interesting trends that I think are also consistent with some of what we're seeing elsewhere. The last one that I noted was that families with children allocated more than any other subgroup to increasing open spaces. And on the other hand, what they would allocate to net zero construction approaches is low relative to other subgroups. And I think I don't have the story for that, if you will, yet, but I think that there's an interesting pattern there that's worth exploring a little bit more. And I think you see some parallel kinds of findings in some other areas of our analysis.
Thank you, John. Before you move on, I think Roberta has a question.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember about what the actual survey said. Was the question increase open spaces? Increase open spaces. The reason I'm asking is, in reality, is that even possible in Eastham? I could see the question being conserve open spaces. But where are we actually going to increase open space? So I guess I'm wondering, is that the term we used in the survey itself?
I believe so. I don't.
I have that up, John. Yeah, increase open spaces, preserve trees and wetlands.
Okay. All right. Just wondering. It's just a little. I guess maybe I noticed it, so I don't know if others will. But it isn't really possible to increase open space. You can people can protect places that are already open, but you can't. How do you increase in an open space unless you become the federal government and take over the land? So I don't know. It's just a small thing.
Or a rich benefactor that donates his property to the town
and tears down the house.
Well, that'll be up to the town, but yeah.
Well, yeah, but yeah, okay. It's just a small thing, but it's just something we should be aware of.
No, it's not. I did find it kind of interesting to see the consistency in the sense that you've got strong support for open spaces, wetland preservation in this question, in this format, and similarly strong support for something comparable in the 11 proposals question, right? You've got protect wetlands and greens there too. I don't remember exactly what the phrasing was, but
so if you said increase open spaces by eminent domain, how many people?
Mike, hold off just a sec. Let me let Alani come in.
Yeah, so I've been listening carefully, and there's a tremendous amount of work here. It's really impressive. I have to say, even as I read some of this material before, obviously the meeting took place, and I found it a little meandering to some degree. When I think about something like preserving open space, which I think is a great question, there's a part of me that says, that kind of belongs to the Conservation Commission. That kind of question, perhaps. And, I think I would imagine I'm new to the group here, right? So I'm, just trying to chime in, but
Mhm.
I feel like what we really want to do is size this up in a way that gives us the top 3 or 4 actionable things that are aligned with the majority of responses
Mhm.
that we got out of this survey. And that's why I don't know if it was Oleg before that said, the support for 11 proposals. This is a very good chart because I think it does show it in some sort of priority. And the first 2 things are really quite prominent. Over 50% of the people
Well,
areas for solar and protecting wetlands and green space. I feel like we should try to keep the messaging as simple as possible.
mhm.
Um, as we make these recommendations and
Mhm.
not because I feel like we could get lost a little bit. And I think, Mike, you said something earlier about could you consolidate the transportation issue with clean energy or something. And that's I think that does make some sense because it'll give that a little bit more heft.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're about. I think.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
thanks,
good.
Eleni.
Yeah, well
And
said.
back to Mike. I know I cut you off there, Mike. Sorry.
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks.
A quick note, John, on
Yeah.
the transportation piece. The label says zero transportation on your charts, but it's really, I think, zero greenhouse gas or zero emission. Um, yeah, let me look it up.
You're talking about down
Zero or
here,
low
right?
carbon.
Yeah.
Yeah, zero or low carbon transportation alternatives, which is
Right.
not just zero transportation. Although I suppose that raises an interesting question. Are people reading that as zero transportation? Um, because in this case, we actually do have transportation as its own category,
Mm-hmm.
simple and pure. I wonder why it got such a low rating there. So
Yeah.
that's something to ponder, I think.
Yeah. 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 I have exactly the same question. Why is that so low? But it's unambiguous in this particular question construction, I think. Um, okay, so that's these are all very helpful notes, and I'm let me just say broad strokes. And I know Jack feels the same. We're very much in agreement that simpler is better. To oversimplify the sentiment, simpler, all else equal, is going to be better, without obviously totally breaking away from the underlying evidence that you've got. So we can definitely do more to consolidate. We wanted to sort of look wide and then narrow things down so that we do have something that is actionable. So just briefly, in the few minutes we've got left, we did have these couple of questions about people's beliefs regarding the economic costs of climate change as well as the effects of climate change, and really the effects one is really about how much we all need to make changes in order to address the effects of climate change. That's really what that one is about. So we haven't done as much analysis on this one yet, but I think there's some potential to look both at the factors that appear to influence which of these categories someone lands in. Do you think climate change matters, but other needs are more important uses for our money? Or do you feel that it's possible for us to address climate change and still do well economically as a country? Or are you more feeling like there's going to be a high price to pay and we just have to pay it? We have these three kind of levels to people's perceptions and beliefs about the price. And the question is, are there any demographic patterns to who's in these categories? And then does who's in these categories have any sort of influence on behaviors or actions or choices? And so this first table, which is all that I'll talk through here with our time remaining, shows both of those possibilities. So it shows for, again, people's self-described financial situation, where people land across these categories, and then shows for the installation of solar panels, how people differ across these categories, so that the people who feel like we're spending too much money on climate change, there are other more important uses, and it's 49 people. It's not zero, but almost all of those people said or don't have solar, which is probably not terribly surprising. But you do find people at the other end of the spectrum, we've got to pay the price, are much more likely, quite a bit more likely to have solar panels installed than people who are feeling like, geez, we're spending too much on climate change already. So as I say, we're just starting to look at these relationships, but I think that there are some interesting possibilities here. So I wanted to give people a few minutes just to react to the use of these couple of questions on beliefs and whether or not you think this is a good direction, interesting, or if you have any other reactions to this part of the analysis.
Roberta.
Opportunity for education.
I didn't hear that.
An opportunity for education.
Opportunity for education.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this analysis of the price for addressing climate change is really, really important, because what it says to me is that there's this 49 people who took the survey who said that climate change matters, but there's more important things to do. But 49 is a very small amount compared to the majority of people who answered this report, saying, yes, it's possible to address it and we need to address it. And I think that's a really, really, really important point that we make, that the survey, people who respond to the surveys feel that we need to act, whether it's individually or as a town or as a region, we need to act. And I think that's what that's saying to me.
Yeah, it's very clear.
Yeah. Eleni, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, Roberta, I completely agree. The 49 people, there's always going to be people that don't follow the herd. But it seems to me that, the 259 and 78, that's the vast majority. And basically what they're saying is absolutely it's doable. And then there's a portion of those people say at whatever cost. So I think the message there is, we're interested in doing something. We don't really know how to proceed. And we definitely need more guidance from an organization, maybe from like us, about how to really think about this and take action. That's what I'm getting from that, the belief piece.
I think you see something similar in the other question, Eleni, as well, which is, as I said earlier, basically about how much change do we all have to make. And you find a significant number of, obviously the largest share of people are saying we all have got to make changes, significant changes to the way we live. But you also find a significant number of people kind of in the middle saying, most of us need to make some adjustments to how we live. And I think that's even the group that I would focus on as an opportunity for educating and working with them. Even more so.
Agreed.
All right. So we are at the 6 o'clock hour. John and Jack, much thanks here. What is the follow-up? I think you would ask for emails on any additional questions and
exactly.
follow-up and comments and suggestions.
Yeah, exactly. Any requests for changes or ideas that you offered during the call, if you would just do us the favor of just following up with a quick email to say, hey, remember I said I'd like to do this, or I'd like to have you do that. We'll both try to do the same from our end with notes, but it would help greatly if you folks did that. And then at next Monday's full committee meeting, we'll provide kind of a what's next, what are the next steps with the survey, and that will enable us to really specify more definitively when the report needs to be ready, and backing off from that when our analysis needs to be completed. So that'll be the next communication with you all, and this will be at next week's committee meeting, full committee meeting.
So,
I think that's it.
Can I propose that we focus on the executive summary for the next meeting? And because if we're gonna get something printed for Windmill Weekend, we basically have to decide on, and give the town enough notice that they'll print the stuff for us. So
what deadline are we talking? I had not been thinking about Windmill Weekend. Sorry about that.
well, Windmill Weekend's like the 9th or something like that, so.
September.
Right. Plus, we got to give the town heads up. We want stuff printed. So.
Well, I think maybe we also want to have the town a chance to read it and approve it before printing something. Yes.
Right. That's why I'm asking focus on the executive summary for release at Windmill Weekend and printing prior. Thank you.
Good topic to talk about at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right. So unless there's any other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
So move.
Well, I didn't move. I'm entertaining motion.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Mike. We have a second.
Yes.
All right. Any all in favor?
Yes.
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 Any opposed? All right. Motion is adjourned. Thanks for spending your extra Monday with us, and we'll see you all in person if you're able.